On the morning of my 28th birthday, I came home from an overnight shift at the hospital to find my photography studio completely stripped bare. Every light stand, every backdrop, both of my camera bodies, all 4 lenses including the 70 to 200 millimeters I'd saved 11 months to buy. My laptop with 4 years of client archives. The rolling equipment case I'd customized with foam inserts cut to fit each piece perfectly. Gone. Every single thing I had built my business on, gone. Like it had never existed. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee when I walked in. She looked up at me and said, "Happy birthday, honey. There's cake in the fridge." I stood there in my scrubs, still smelling like antiseptic, staring at the open door of the spare bedroom where I kept my studio, and I thought I was losing my mind. "Where is my equipment?" She set her mug down slowly. "Your father and I talked about it. We needed to help your brother get back on his feet. You know how he's been struggling. I want you to understand something about my brother Nathan. He is 32 years old. He has lost 3 jobs in 4 years, not because the economy is hard or because he was laid off, but because he simply stopped showing up when something better feels like it might be out there. He moved back home 18 months ago after his second eviction. My parents let him take over the master bedroom and moved themselves into the smaller room because, and I am quoting my mother directly here, Nathan needs his space to decompress. I had been living in their house for 7 months. I moved back temporarily after my apartment lease ended while I was saving for a down payment on my own place. I was paying them $800 a month in rent, doing my own laundry, buying my own groceries, and running a photography business on the side of my full-time nursing job. I had told them from day one that my equipment was not communal property. I had said it clearly. My father had nodded and said, of course. Everything in that room is yours. Everything in that room is yours. Everything in that room," his words. "How much did you get for it?" I asked. My mother looked uncomfortable. "We didn't want to bother you with the details." "How much?" "Around $4,000. $4,000. My equipment was worth close to $18,000. I had receipts. I had insurance documentation. I had every single purchase record in a spreadsheet on a cloud backup because I had planned to claim depreciation on my taxes. $4,000 for $18,000 worth of gear, sold to God knows who, without a word to me, while I was working a 12-hour overnight shift taking care of other people's sick family members. I didn't raise my voice. I want to be clear about that because I have seen what raising your voice gets you in this family. It gets you the "you're being dramatic" conversation, the "we're just trying to hold this family together" speech, and then somehow you end up apologizing for being upset about the thing that was done to you. I had watched that happen to myself enough times to know better. I went to my room. I sat on my bed and I called the non-emergency line for our local police department. The officer who came out was patient and thorough. I showed him my insurance records, my purchase receipts, the spreadsheet, photos I had taken of the equipment for insurance purposes. I told him exactly what had happened. He took a report. He explained that regardless of whether it was family, the equipment was mine, purchased with my money, and selling it without my consent constituted theft. He said it calmly and matter-of-factly, standing in my parents' living room while my mother sat on the couch looking like she might faint, and my father stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, like he was the one being wronged. My father said, "You called the police on your own family." The officer said, "Sir, your daughter's property was sold without her knowledge or permission. That's not a family matter, that's a legal matter." Nathan, of course, was not home. Nathan was rarely home before 2 in the afternoon. The officer told me that the next step would be identifying the buyer. He suggested I ask my parents directly while he was present, because they would be more likely to cooperate. My father stared at the ceiling for a long moment, and then said they had sold it to someone named Terry who ran a second-hand electronics and camera shop about 20 minutes away. We went there that afternoon. Me, the officer, and my father, who came because the officer strongly suggested that having a family member present to explain the situation would help move things along. Terry, it turned out, was cooperative. He pulled up the transaction record immediately. He had paid $4,200 for equipment he knew was worth considerably more. He hadn't asked where it came from. When the officer explained the situation, Terry said he would hold everything and not sell any of it until the matter was resolved legally. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. I was still living in my parents' house because I had nowhere else to go on a 7-day notice, which is what my father gave me the morning after the police visit. He slid a handwritten note under my bedroom door that said I had 7 days to find alternate housing because the atmosphere in this home has become untenable. I kept that note. I photographed it and emailed it to myself with a timestamp. I called a tenants' rights attorney. She told me that a 7-day notice was not legally enforceable in our state for a tenant who had been paying rent for more than 30 days, and that I had the right to remain in the property for a minimum of 30 days with proper written notice. She also told me that the civil case for my equipment was straightforward, given my documentation, and that I had strong grounds to recover the full market value, not just what Terry had paid for it. I did not tell my parents any of this. I just kept going to work. Nathan came to find me 3 days later. He knocked on my bedroom door around 10 at night and asked if he could come in. I opened the door but didn't invite him to sit. He stood in the doorway looking at his own feet. I didn't know they were going to do it, he said. I looked at him for a moment. Did you ask them for money? He was quiet for long enough that I had my answer. I told them I needed to get my car fixed so I could start applying for jobs, he said. I didn't tell them to sell your stuff. But you knew they would find a way to get you the money. He didn't answer that either. Here is the thing about Nathan. I don't think he is a bad person. I think he is a 32-year-old man who has been treated like a child his entire life and has never once been allowed to feel the full weight of his own choices, because our parents have always rushed in to absorb the impact before it could reach him. I think he is stunted in a way that is going to take years of his own hard work to undo if he ever decides to do that work. I think he genuinely did not tell them to sell my things. I also think he didn't try very hard to stop it once he knew. Get a loan? I said. Your car repair is not my problem. I closed the door. My mother tried twice during that period to have what she called a calm conversation. The first time she knocked on my door and said she wanted me to understand that everything they did came from a place of love, that family means sacrificing for each other, and that she hoped I could find it in my heart to see that. I told her I had documented everything and was working with an attorney, and that if she wanted to discuss it further, she should have her own attorney present. She left. The second time she came in while I was in the kitchen making dinner, and she started crying. Real tears, the kind that used to make me put down whatever I was doing and go wrap my arms around her. I stood at the stove and kept stirring. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't realize how serious it was. She said she thought I could always buy more equipment because I was so capable. I said, I'm capable because I work for what I have. That's different from having unlimited things to take. She went back to her room. At the end of the 30 days, I had found an apartment. It was a 1-bedroom in a quieter part of town, $400 more per month than I had been hoping to spend, but it was mine. I had also, through my attorney, reached a resolution with Terry. Because my documentation was so thorough and because my father had essentially confirmed the theft by accompanying the police officer to the shop, Terry agreed to return the equipment rather than wait for a civil judgment. Everything came back. Every camera body, every lens, every light stand, the rolling case with the foam inserts, even the laptop with the hard drive intact. The night before I moved out, I packed everything I owned into my car and my friend Carla's borrowed truck. I did it between 11 at night and 3 in the morning so I wouldn't have to have a conversation about it. I left my key on the kitchen counter with a note that said my forwarding address for the security deposit return and nothing else. My father texted me the next morning. The text said, I hope you're happy. I did not respond. 3 weeks later, my mother called. She said my father wanted to talk. I said I was available for a conversation if it included a direct apology and an explanation of how they planned to make it right, and that I would need at least 48 hours notice before any call so I could have my attorney available if needed. She said that seemed very formal for a family conversation. I said that formal was where we were now, because informal hadn't worked out for me. My father called 2 days later. He sounded different than I expected. Smaller, somehow. He said he had been thinking a lot about what had happened. He said he knew that what he and my mother had done was wrong, not just legally, but as parents. He said he had spent a week trying to convince himself that he had done what he had to do for the family, and that at some point he had stopped being able to make himself believe it. I listened. I didn't fill the silences the way I used to. He said Nathan had gotten a job, a real one, at a logistics company, entry level but with benefits. He said Nathan had applied without telling anyone and had gotten the offer and announced it at dinner, and that my mother had cried. He said he thought maybe they had not done Nathan any favors over the years by making everything too easy. I said, "No, you didn't." There was a long pause. "What would it take," he said, "for you to consider coming back to Sunday dinners?" I thought about that question for a moment. I thought about all the Sunday dinners I had sat through while Nathan was treated like a guest of honor, and I was treated like the responsible one, which in our family meant the one who needed the least attention and got it. I thought about the birthday morning, the coffee mug, the cake in the fridge. I said, "I need a written acknowledgement from both you and Mom that what you did was theft. Not we made a mistake, not we're sorry things got complicated. Theft. And I need a payment plan in writing for the difference between what Terry paid you and the actual market value of my equipment, which my attorney has documented at $14,000. He was quiet for a long time. "That's a lot of money," he said. "Yes," I said. "It is. It was my money." And then it wasn't. Another pause. Then, "Okay, I'll talk to your mother." It took another 3 weeks and 2 more phone calls, but they signed the acknowledgement. My attorney drafted a simple repayment agreement, $500 a month, no interest, because I did not want to be cruel. I just wanted what was mine returned to me in some form. My father signed it without argument. My mother cried again when she signed it, and I let her, and I did not comfort her, and I did not feel guilty about that. I went back to Sunday dinners 6 weeks after that. It was awkward in the specific way that things are awkward when everyone in the room knows what happened and no one is quite sure what the new rules are. Nathan was there. He talked about his job. He seemed, genuinely, a little more solid than I remembered. Like gravity had finally gotten a hold on him. After dinner, my father walked me out to my car. He said he was proud of me. Not for forgiving him. He didn't ask for that, and I respected him more for it. But for building something real. He said he hadn't understood what my photography business actually was until he saw what Terry had for sale and realized, looking at the equipment laid out on those shelves, how serious it was. He said he thought it was a hobby. I said, "You never asked." He nodded. "No, I didn't." I drove home to my apartment, which smelled like fresh paint and the candle I'd bought for the windowsill in the kitchen. My equipment was in the second bedroom, which I had set up as a studio. I had a client session booked for Saturday morning, a maternity shoot, and I was already planning the lighting setup in my head. My phone buzzed. A text from Nathan. It just said, "Thanks for not giving up on us completely. I know you didn't have to." I set the phone down on my kitchen counter and looked out the window for a while. Then I made myself some tea, went over my shot list for Saturday, and went to bed. I did not need anyone to tell me I had done the right thing. I already knew. I had known it standing in that empty room on my birthday morning, still in my scrubs, looking at the space where my life's work used to be. I had known it when I picked up the phone and called the police, instead of sitting down and crying. I had known it every quiet, methodical step after that. Some people wait their whole lives for their family to finally see them clearly. I stopped waiting. I made myself so visible, so documented, so undeniably real in the legal and financial sense, that they had no choice but to look. That's not the version of the story where everything gets fixed, and everyone learns their lesson perfectly, and we all gather around a table and laugh about it someday. That's not where I am. Maybe that's where we'll be in 5 years. Maybe not. What I know is this: my cameras are on the shelf where I put them. My name is on my lease. My business made $31,000 last year and is on track to make $40,000 this year. Every piece of that was built by me, protected by me, and recovered by me when someone tried to take it. Nobody is selling my things again. I've thought a lot about the moment I decided not to cry in that empty room. Not because I wasn't hurt. I was devastated in a way that sat somewhere between grief and fury and exhaustion. but because I understood, standing there in my birthday scrubs, that crying wasn't going to get my lenses back. Documentation was. A phone call was. Knowing exactly what I owned and what it was worth was. That's the part nobody talks about when they tell you to stand up for yourself. They make it sound like a feeling, like some burst of courage that arrives when you need it. But what actually protected me wasn't courage. It was the spreadsheet I built for tax purposes. It was the photos I'd taken of every piece of equipment for my insurance rider. It was 3 years of receipts organized in a folder I almost didn't bother keeping. The preparation I did for completely ordinary reasons became the exact thing that made it impossible for my parents to gaslight me about what had happened and what it was worth. That's what I mean when I say that building something real protects you in ways you don't always anticipate. I wasn't building a legal case when I cataloged my gear. I was just being responsible. But responsibility has a way of compounding. It accumulates quietly in the background of your life until the moment you need it, and then it shows up fully formed. My father thought I was being cold when I told him I needed everything in writing. He said it felt like I was treating family like strangers. And I thought about that for a long time afterward, because I understood why it felt that way to him. But I also understood that the version of family that operated on informal trust and verbal promises had already cost me $18,000 worth of work. I wasn't being cold. I was being honest about what the situation had actually revealed. Nathan is doing better. I believe that's real. But I also think the most useful thing that happened to him wasn't my parents eventually holding back their help. It was experiencing what it felt like to need something and have to figure it out himself. The job he found on his own. That matters. Not because struggle is good in itself, but because competence only builds through actual contact with difficulty. You cannot develop it secondhand. What I kept coming back to in all those weeks of legal consultations and quiet packing and late-night drives home from shifts was how much clarity I found in just doing the next right thing. Not the next emotional thing. Not the next dramatic thing. The next right thing. File the report. Document the value. Contact the attorney. Give proper notice. Sign the agreement. Show up to dinner when the conditions are met. There's something almost mechanical about integrity when you strip away all the noise around it. It's just the habit of doing what you said you would do and requiring that the people in your life eventually do the same. I held that line, not because I stopped loving my family, but because I finally understood that love without accountability isn't protection. It's just sentiment. My cameras are on the shelf. My name is on the lease. My business is growing. That's not luck. That's the direct result of 10,000 small decisions to take my own work seriously, even when the people closest to me didn't.